Howdy everyone, Jeremy here. We've got a great episode of Taxpayer Talks for you today. We recently interviewed Bill Peacock on fiscal issues that are facing the state of Texas, and we got his thoughts on how we can address several of them. We also discussed the loophole that local governments are using to raise property tax rates without having to go to the voters and what that means for Texas taxpayers. And then lastly, we talk about issues that are most concerning to Texas taxpayers ahead of the November general election. Stay tuned. Taxpayer Talks is brought to you by Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, and it's only made possible from generous donations from listeners like you. If you want to support our work, you can visit texastaxpayers.com/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution today. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Taxpayer Talks, the podcast where we hold Austin accountable by giving taxpayers news that affects their wallets. My name is Tim Harden. I'm president of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. I'm here with my partner, Jeremy Kitchen, our executive director. How you doing today?
Doing okay, man.
Good. So how's the week been, man? What have you been up to?
It's been busy, right? As everyone knows, the election is right around the corner. So I'm sure everyone is currently being inundated with campaign advertisements and seeing stuff all over social media, kind of the bunting, if you will. It's the 3 bullet points on why you should vote for X, Y, and Z candidate or why the other one's bad. And so just kind of trying to keep tabs on that and keeping people honest.
Yeah, when elections approach, it kind of consumes the news cycle, and so we have less fiscal issues going on aside from our impending economic collapse that I'm sure is coming. I think we have CPI coming out this week, which I'm sure we'll comment on when we get those numbers. But this week I went and spoke at TTP or True Texas Project. There was a panel of people, a lot of friendly groups, and we were just kind of going over our legislative priorities. So, of course, I talked about the Texas Prosperity Plan, and it was really encouraging. There was, I think, like 60 to 100 people there. It was up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I think you and I are both doing a few more of those just to kind of go out and educate taxpayers and promote our Texas Prosperity Plan and fiscal responsibility. So it's been awesome. It's been a good week.
Yeah, that's right. I think we both have events right today. I guess with this recording is going live. I've got one in Northwest Houston, which is to do that, and the True Texas Project, talk about that sort of stuff. And I think you have one that was the Parker County Conservatives, right?
Yeah, I'm with Parker County this evening, as a matter of fact. So let's get into the news. So we did something special this week. We did have a special guest. We had a conversation with Bill Peacock, who has a podcast, the Liberty Cafe. Of course, he's been involved in the Texas budget and economics in general for decades, and so he's just a wealth of knowledge. And we had a few questions. The interview was actually probably 20 or 30 minutes long. We're going to post that audio on some of our platforms, which we'll share. We're going to share a few clips and some answers that he gave regarding the budget and corporate welfare. And so let's show those clips real quick and just kind of show the viewers our conversation with Bill.
Well, there's nothing wrong with improving the budgeting process. I mean, Matt Schaefer, state representative, is spending a lot of time. He's gotten himself on the appropriations committee, which is a thankless task. I'm glad he's on there. I'm glad he's focused on that. But the truth of the matter is, it's not the budgeting process that matters. It's how much money they spend. And the whole system, the whole appropriations process is geared towards spending more money. And so if you just improve the budgetary process, make it more efficient, they're going to more efficiently spend more money.
They will more efficiently spend your money. So, of course, this was as a response to one of the questions we had about, we hear from taxpayers all the time, right? Especially those that are actually interested in how government spends their money, which is, well, why don't we just change the process, right? If we had zero-based budgeting or if we had some sort of other budgeting scheme, why just change the process? And I think we kind of, even though that would be great, I think conservatives have generally talked about those sorts of budgeting structures or schemes teams for a long time. The reality is that, they're just going to continue to find ways, as Bill said, right, to spend our money. And so until we put enough pressure on them to not spend as much of that money, nothing will necessarily ever change, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, there's a number of policies we could implement. There's appraisal reform, there's reform to the budgetary process, there's things like zero-based budgeting. These are not bad reforms, but none of them are going to solve the overarching problem of the growth of government. And this is why we chose a frozen budget as the way to deal with the budget in Texas, because overall, at the macro level, stopping the spending and stopping the growth of government is paramount to anything else. Because as you know, and as I know, being in that building for close to a decade, he's right. They're going to find any way they can. They will break rules. They'll suspend the Constitution. They will do whatever they have to do to spend money unless you have completely capped them and tied their hands. And so we think that if government is already too big, then we should not grow it one more inch until it is at a reasonable size. There's debate on what that size looks like. I always say, it's so small I can barely see it, and we are very, very far from that. And so we would elect, instead of going with the good reform, the conservative reform that capped to population plus inflation. It was a good reform, but especially in a year where we have 8-9% inflation, this is going to grow our budget massively. And if our government is already too big, we should stop it at that macro level.
So of course we talked to Bill about that, right? And he had some thoughts. So let's watch that clip here as well.
Really, one of the main things we want to talk about today is, if you remember, we had a conversation about a year ago when we were talking about our legislative priorities and looking at a new metric. Really is what we were looking for. We passed the spending limit this last go round. This is something that TFR was actually founded on back in 2006. It was finally fully accomplished, I assume, last go round. And so, with inflation where it's at, we were looking at the upcoming budget and just how much, even with that conservative metric, it's going to grow. And so we introduced this idea of a frozen budget, which came, like I said, from a conversation and just kind of your experience dealing with the budgetary process. And so we just kind of want to know your thoughts on the best way to reform the budget. We had talked about, the micro level and the difficulties at the micro level, reforming the budget with things like zero-based budgeting and individual programs, and then possibly focusing on the budget as a whole, which is the route we took. So just kind of want to know the history of where you came to your own conclusions on that matter.
Yeah, well, for a long time, y'all are aware, and most of our listeners are probably aware, that the idea of some kind of spending limit on governments has been a big issue in conservative circles. And probably the most famous of those was the one that Colorado adopted back up in, when was that, in the 1990s, I think it was, that the budget of the state could only grow by so much. And mainly, I think it was probably a percentage target. And that actually led to some pretty significant spending restrictions up in Colorado. But then the politicians, even the Republicans, got involved and said, well, that doesn't really give us enough room to do our jobs. And so they went in and changed it, their term and expenditure, their expenditure limit. And then it kind of went by the wayside. Well, Texas has had one of those in place too, but it's always been based on the growth of the economy and the way in the Texas Constitution. And that was judged by the legislature to be the growth of personal income. Well, the growth of personal income is much, much, much faster than the actual growth of the economy and individuals' income. And so Texas has been fighting for years, conservative Texans have been fighting for years to bring that down to a lower level. For instance, something like population growth plus inflation. And lo and behold, last session, we finally got that into law, right? Well, what happens as soon as we get that into law? Inflation skyrockets, right? And so now if our budget stays at population growth plus inflation, it could be going up at 10, 12, 13% a year, right? And so that kind of highlights the games that politicians play with our money, because they don't want us to know how much money they're spending. And they want us, they put a spending limit in place and it's really high, and then they make it, and then they brag about how well they're doing by keeping the spending under the spending limit. And so all that being said, talked with a lot of friends and other people over time, including you guys, and really determined there was two basic ways to deal with this. One is just everybody I know who's a conservative at some level thinks government is too big. And if government is too big already, we shouldn't be going around congratulating ourselves. Now, it's a necessary step perhaps to getting to where we want to be, but we really shouldn't be too excited about just limiting the growth of government. We ought to stop the growth of government. Actually, we should be cutting government, but let's just take it one step at a time, limiting the growth. The next step, I think, is stopping the growth of government. So that could be a zero growth government, you could call it, or a liberty budget, whatever you want to call it. The government spending should not grow anymore.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting point, right? Like, and you said the same thing where it's, it's great. Conservatives had a victory, right? We had a budget spending limit that was capped at population and inflation. Obviously it's a metric that, a think tank uses here. And also a lot of conservatives have rallied around kind of this definition of a conservative Texas budget. That's great. But here we are, we've entered a large inflationary period with seemingly not necessarily an end in sight, depending on the economist you talk to. And the concern is that we don't want to give free license to lawmakers to appropriate even more money under the reasoning that, inflation has gone up, especially when we take, right, the position that the budget was already way past where it should be to begin with. It shouldn't be free license for them to spend even more.
Yeah, I think you talk to any investor worth their salt for a personal budget, and what they're going to tell you in a high inflationary time, the high priority is to pay off debt, right? Is to get out of debt. There's this misinformation that the money's inflating, so my debt's going to be worth less, and it's just not true. You get yourself in more trouble if you're in debt. So we should be doing the same thing. We should be cutting spending. We should be tightening the belt, and we should be investing in only core functions of government, getting our house in order. The last one we talked about was actually Chapter 313s, which is something we have been spending a lot of time on. Of course, there's a rumor that they are going to be renewed. Dave Phelan came out and said that he supports them in a different form. So let's take a look at what Bill had to say about those.
I'm sure you've heard the rumors, and some have been actually public about it, that leadership, specifically in the House, Phelan has come out and said that he has the desire to renew corporate welfare, or specifically Chapter 313 abatements in a different form. Why are they doing this? We've heard from both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, that the parties themselves do not want these things to exist. So why is leadership wanting to renew these again after they're set to expire, I believe, in December of this year?
I was able to go up and testify at the Capitol, I guess about a month ago now. And the first words out of my mouth were reminding the members of the committee who were there that it was not very long ago that corporate welfare was considered theft in the Texas Constitution. There's a gift clause in the Texas Constitution that says the government can't take money from one person and give it to another person. That's called theft. It's corruption. But then in 1987, the legislature passed a constitutional amendment, sent it to the voters, and the voters approved that with like 51.2% of the vote, something like that. And because of that close vote back in 1987, now the government can take our money, individual taxpayers, and give it to ExxonMobil and particularly huge renewable energy companies that make billions of dollars around the world, those kinds of things. And so, what I think it kind of gets back into this framework we're talking about. Texas property taxes are really high. Businesses don't like it. And so I think what this corporate welfare does is it allows the legislature to buy off big business, and so gives them big tax breaks. These 313, 312, and other tax breaks, cut their property taxes in half for 10 years. and it buys them off. And that's just one constituency that isn't giving them a hard time about high property taxes anymore. And then, they're keeping the schools and the local governments happy by spending all that money.
Yeah, so 313s, right? Kind of talking about the fact that there are people, at least in the past, that have previously qualified for these kind of tax exemptions. And by the way, those people are businesses, not actual individual taxpayers who end up kind of brunting the difference, if you will, there. And so it's certainly concerning, to Bill's point, that they're potentially going to be brought back. What's unclear is whether or not lawmakers will follow suit and bring it back in some capacity.
Yeah, I actually did an interview with Bloomberg yesterday. It should be coming out of the next week, and we talked specifically about this. And there's so many problems with these 313s. And not only the fact that we're going to renew them, but it is the largest corporate welfare program in Texas, totaling I think about $11 billion. There's in this last year, there's I think 490 applications, where typically in a typical year, I think it was like somewhere between 60 and 90. And then there's this flood of all of these companies and putting in placeholders that, hey, they might need this in 20 or 30 years. Just all kinds of shadiness going on. The program needs to end. We oppose all corporate welfare. It doesn't matter who you're giving it to. And so we'll see in this next legislative session.
It's one of the issues that has bipartisan support, right? Like the Texas GOP and Texas Democrats both have it in their platforms that they're opposed to corporate welfare.
Yeah, if they somehow renew this, it's going to tell us a lot about how that legislature really works. So if you have both parties opposing it, but yeah, magically somehow it still passes, it tells you how things really work in that building. So. Speaking of the legislature and past legislation, I did write an article this week talking about the loopholes in SB 2, the 2019 historic property tax reform that we mentioned quite often. And there was an interaction that we had with Chairman of the Republican Party, Matt Rinaldi. And essentially he was making the point that Dallas was raising their rates over the 3.5%. And of course, we answered him and we said, hey, there's a loophole, and then kind of went into the explanation of exactly what this is. And essentially what it is not to get too nitpicky on the policy or the bill, but what they passed is they have a provision that allows, if you have not for the last 3 years raised to that voter approval rate, you can essentially bank the leftover rate. So let's say that the rate's 3.5. Let's say you only raised to 2.5 all of those years. You would have 1% in each year that it's now expiring this year. That provision expires in December of this year. And so all of these cities who are wanting to money grab, they can take all of that 3%, stack it on top as long as they're right below that, and still be able to raise the rate far above the voter approval rate without triggering an election. It's shady. There's a lot of problems with that bill that passed. Of course, there was some good stuff as well, but this is just another example of inside baseball and lawmakers of the state kind of reaching behind the backs in dark, shady rooms and saying, hey, here you go, cities. And then of course they play this game. We talk about the cities blame the state blame the cities. So. What's your thoughts, Jeremy?
Yeah, it's just, man, it's to be expected, sadly, right? It's like you had the disaster loophole provision, right, that was supposed to be remedied, right, just here. And it's just, man, this reform package, they had all this back and forth. You had these supposed Republicans standing up, right, to these local government jurisdictions. And here we are, we find out that they've given them provisions, right, these local governments provisions to do the exact opposite of what the quote unquote intent of the bill was, and this is really the first cycle in which it's all kind of coming into its full implementation. And if you're a taxpayer, right, who's just concerned about rising property taxes, you've got to be just tired of this, right? Why can't we just simply address the problem and stop with this circular firing squad of the state blaming the local governments and local governments blaming the state? It's a terrible tax system, and it's beyond time that we deal with this issue and move on.
Yeah, the goal is complete elimination, because you can't fix a broken system, right? And we could sit here and count the number of lies that were told to us by the legislature, whether, when it passed in 2019, hey, you're going to see your property tax bills go down. They have not gone down, right? Recently in the summer when they were having, Senate finance hearings and House appropriations hearing, hey, don't worry. I know you're scared about your appraisals, but all the local subdivisions, the ISDs and the cities, they're going to lower to the no new revenue rates, and it's going to be just fine. Guess what? That was a lie as well. And then, of course, now we continue to see cities abuse these loopholes, and it just shows that, for the most part, aside from a few critical reforms, the whole bill was just a big show, right? Where they get to go blow trumpets in the streets and say, hey, look, we provided relief, but there is no relief. No one's tax bill has gone down. And, the hope is that we don't do this again this next go round. That's our fear, right? Is they throw some money at the situation, they compress some rates, and then they're done with it. But they don't tie, like Oliverson's bill, tie to elimination specifically of the M&O, which, by the way, just another reminder, Greg Abbott said was his goal, right? In the debate, he said, my goal is to eliminate school property taxes to let people own their home. Hey, we applaud that. We're, of course, cautiously optimistic that he is going to be able to do that. The first step would be to add that to his priorities, his legislative priorities. If he does not do that, then we are going to know that that was just an outright lie as well.
Yeah, once again, look, if he does not add this to his, in his state of the state address, first week of February during the legislative session, if he does not add this as an emergency item, I think taxpayers should absolutely be concerned that it's not going to be taken seriously, or at least in the way that we think it should be done, which is not only buying down maintenance and operation, right? It's how we wholeheartedly support that as a means to actually provide relief that isn't a trinket, right? Or a slow the growth kind of strategy that they've done in the past. But we also need to simultaneously put us on a path to the elimination of this absolutely terrible tax.
Yeah, and for those, we interact with taxpayers a lot, and they'll say, hey, well, what can Abbott do, right? And in a sense, yeah, he's not a legislator, right? He's not writing the laws, but he has a few things that can overpower the legislature, right? One, he has a bully pulpit. He can control policy, and specifically the way he can control policy is he can call an unlimited number of special sessions until this is accomplished. And so the easiest way that Abbott could absolutely come through on his goal to eliminate school property taxes would be to put it as a legislative priority and say, if you do not pass this, I will call an unlimited amount of special sessions forever until you do. And if he did that, I guarantee you they would eliminate it or put us on a path of elimination. So don't buy into that he can't do anything. Yes, the legislators have their responsibility. They have to craft the bill and have a clean bill that would do that. But he absolutely is driving the train. And so we have to hold him accountable, especially with the bold statement he made in the debate, for sure.
I mean, look, taxpayers want this, right? We've written about this several times, right? There was polling done, I think, by Defend Texas Liberty PAC just a month or two ago, right, where it said that taxpayers want actual property tax relief. This kind of segues into our next portion here where, I wrote this week about Fiscal Note, right? Survey results, right? We do a survey every week for subscribers to our weekly email that goes out on Fridays. And last week's, survey was, what are, out of these, I think, 6 items, what are the most important issues to you going into the November election? And property taxes were number 2 on that list, right behind border security, right? And so wrote about that, obviously. We've talked about property taxes ad nauseum, but you've also got the border security issue, something else that Greg Abbott has come out on multiple times. We don't know to what end, right? I'm not so sure that I can specifically, talk to a result that has come right out of the state trying to get involved or spend taxpayer money on border security efforts, other than we spent over $4 billion on Operation Lone Star thus far, and likely will be requesting even more money this next legislative cycle for it. We've spent, I think it's ranged from $1,400 to $1,700 per bus rider, right, on this kind of busing stunt that Abbott's done. But, taxpayers, I think, are keenly, especially now in an election, kind of this last month of the election, keenly aware of these issues going into this next cycle. And property taxes right there up with border security. I don't think the legislature is going to be able to ignore the issue like they have in the past.
Yeah, I think, to concede that I think the border is an issue. I think we have to deal with it. There's a lot of calls for Abbott to declare an invasion. A lot of people think that what hopefully soon to be Governor Kerry Lake will do that and put pressure on Abbott in January. We'll see. From our perspective, this is a fiscal issue because not only do we have people coming in jeopardizing in our quote unquote safety net, right, where we have all of our welfare programs are just being completely drained. We have, like you said, $4 billion that was spent on securing the border. And what did we get? I remember the article you wrote, is it juice worth the squeeze? That's a lot of money to have not really solved the issue or come even close to it. As a matter of fact, we've heard that they are talking about spending more out of the surplus, right? Probably 2 or 3 billion more dollars on securing the border. Are we going to get the exact same result? Just a bunch of money thrown at the situation and nothing done. We will see. I think it is important to note that with everything going on, especially nationally, poll after poll after poll is showing with Roe being overturned and all of these caustic issues. Still, in taxpayers and voters' minds, the number one issue is the economy. The economy is what is crushing people, inflation. And so we should take notes from that in Texas. And we should know that people are hurting. People are likely going to be pushed out of their homes if nothing is done on property taxes. And so we beg the legislature to deal with this and to give taxpayers relief because it's probably going to be a rough couple of years coming up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think that is all we have today. We appreciate y'all being with us. We will be back again next Thursday at 5:30. Y'all have a great week, and we will see you then.
Take care. For even more content, follow us on social media at Texas Taxpayers on Facebook and Instagram, at Texas_Taxpayers on Twitter. Subscribe to the Fiscal Note, our weekly email jam-packed full of information important to Texas taxpayers at texastaxpayers.com/subscribe. And then make sure to check out our Texas Prosperity Plan, texastaxpayers.com/TPP. Thanks. Hey, you made it to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that way you're notified next time we post a video and update to the channel. Thanks again.